If London wanted to move events in Ukraine closer to the brink, it has succeeded in doing so with its recent decision to provide the Kiev government with depleted uranium munitions. Russia's President Vladimir Putin had promised a reciprocal response, and now one has been announced. Russia's tactical nuclear weapons may arrive in Belarus within weeks. That was the announcement on Saturday from the Kremlin. Moscow is completing construction of a specialized storage facility for such arms after repeated calls by Minsk to deploy them on its soil. For more on that, we go to Moscow to speak with Mark Sleboda, analyst and lecturer at Moscow State University. Mark, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and hope all is well in Moscow.
Don, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
It's our honor and pleasure to have you. Moscow announced that they're going to be basing some tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, or in any event, they're making preparations to house them there. The United States, I assume, is going to start screaming about this being a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, because Belarus is not a recognized nuclear power. Omitted from that conversation, of course, is the fact that over the history of the treaty, the United States has been basing nuclear weapons all over the place, saying that because we retain control of it, it's not proliferation. Even though we now have our nuclear weapons in Germany and France and blah, 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 all these other places, that because they're under U.S. control, it's not proliferation. And so now they're going to have to eat a little bit of that themselves.
Yeah. Okay. So Russia has announced that it is going to deploy a number of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. First of all, there should be a reminder that Russia and Belarus are in a close political and military union. There actually has been, since the 90s, and increasingly dense in the last couple of years, a union state of Russia and Belarus,
right.
Something that the Western media often tries to ignore. But Belarus, even separate from that, is an ally of Russia within the Collective Security Treaty Organization. This move is being presented by the Kremlin as a response to the United Kingdom sending depleted uranium munitions, with its small number of Challenger tanks that it is sending to East Ukraine. And depleted uranium is something that we have previously seen the U.S. and the United Kingdom use in Iraq and Serbia, and they try to brush away concerns of with its use. The problem is that when the munitions are fired, when they're both fired out of, say, the tank or whatever is launching them, and at their impact point, they release radioactive fines into the air. Very small particles, but these are toxic. They have a much higher than background radiation level, and they enter into the local environment, into people's lungs and the like. And the evidence is unequivocal. However much the U.S. military tries to sweep it under the carpet, that cancer rates and rates of birth defects and the like in areas where this is used go through the roof.
In excess of what was the remainder of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as a matter of fact.
Yes, it's extremely high, so Russia considers the use of this ammunition to be that they've outright said it. They consider it equivalent to a dirty bomb strike.
Right.
And this is being presented as their response to this step. I don't think that's true. I think that this is a measure that Russia has long wanted to pull out because, as you mentioned, the United States has hundreds of tactical nuclear weapons deployed in Europe. They've had them there since the Cold War, and they have never brought them home.
Right.
And recently, actually, they have modernized them. They have provided a degree of modernization, and they're in a process of doing so. Most of these are gravity bombs designed to be dropped from European aircraft under U.S. direction on Russia, right? That's what they're there for, and Russia has long objected to that, and the U.S. has ignored any idea that this is a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And it's not exactly a secret thing. It has been discussed before in the Western mainstream media and acknowledged, and it's just quietly another thing that's ignored because it doesn't present a good position
Right.
for the United States. And I think that Russia has long wanted to take this step in response, and they're using this opportunity to do so, primarily because they don't have a good response to the U.S. use of the United Kingdom sending depleted uranium ammunition. They're not going to deploy depleted uranium ammunition because it is going to destroy the environment in East Ukraine.
Right.
And the Kiev regime in the West, they have no problem deploying this, and it's in effect a radioactive scorched earth policy.
Right.
Why? Because they know they're not going to be allowed to keep East Ukraine when this is all said and done anyway.
Right.
And they don't care about the people living there. They've been shelling them for the last 9 years in an attempt to subjugate them. And they have no problem doing this. Russia does. So obviously they're not going to use depleted uranium ammunition in Ukraine against a population that they care about and a territory that they now consider to be part of Russia. So I think this is actually far more about a long-wanted response, a quid pro quo to the U.S. deployment of tactical nuclear weapons in Europe, rather than actually about the depleted uranium ammunition. But it's being presented as such because Russia simply doesn't have a good response to that.
Just curiously, by the way, with respect to the treaty, there are 3 points to the treaty. One is non-proliferation, which the United States has blown out of the water by redefining proliferation. The second is disarmament. There was supposed to actually be an aggressive effort towards nuclear disarmament beginning in 1968, which the United States has shown is so empty that they allocated $1 trillion during the Obama administration for new nuclear weapons. And finally, the right to peaceful use of atomic energy, and just ask Iran how that's going.
Yeah, I mean, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is a joke, but let's be honest about this.
Yep.
None of the major nuclear states has made any serious step towards denuclearization. Not the U.S., not Russia, not China, not the United Kingdom, not France, not Israel, who doesn't even acknowledge that they have nuclear weapons. We've seen nuclear weapons use spread to India and Pakistan, and that was then just quietly accepted, and relations gone back to normal after a few years, and now North Korea has nuclear weapons as well. It does create a tier of states who have a strategic deterrent, and a tier of states who don't. And the argument that the U.S. presents about their nuclear weapons in Europe is that they are under U.S. military control. And, well, that's the same thing Russia is saying in Belarus. So, the United States obviously can't have it both ways. If Russia has control of those nuclear weapons in Belarus, then it's simply a quid pro quo step. I don't regard those. First of all, I don't regard the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as serious. It is quite obviously something that the major nuclear power states, all of them, have never fulfilled their own promise of denuclearization. Quite the opposite on. They simply used it as a chance to get rid of antiquated stockpiles of nuclear weapons that they no longer needed, while maintaining what modernized nuclear weapons they did need. Not only as a strategic deterrence, but as a strategic force. And both the U.S. Has been, the Pentagon has been screaming for years, and finally gotten the development and deployment of what it considers to be more usable nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons that they can use small enough to be used on the battlefield, which should terrify anyone. But
Right.
that is essentially what this is in both cases. These are tactical nuclear weapons. That is what they are designed to be used for on both sides.
And what they do basically is provide a mechanism for an easier step over the threshold of use than, say, bombing cities with nuclear weapons. And that's the scary part. And Mark, thank you so much for your time, and we'll speak with you again next week.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.